Welcome to Softly Curious. Tonight, we are not looking at flowers. We are standing in their presence. Flowers are often described as beautiful, fragile, decorative. These words are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Beauty is what remains after the deeper processes have finished their work. What we usually notice is the surface moment, not the preparation, not the cost, not the precision required for that moment to exist at all. A flower is not a constant state. It is an event. For many plants, flowering is the most energy-demanding act of their entire life cycle. Long before a bud forms, the plant has already diverted resources, postponed growth elsewhere, and accepted risks that cannot be reversed. Leaves, roots, and stems quietly support this decision, even though none of them benefit directly from it. This is why flowers appear suddenly, not because they are spontaneous, but because their preparation is invisible. Some plants spend years accumulating enough internal signals to allow flowering. They measure light not by brightness, but by darkness. They count the uninterrupted length of night with proteins that degrade at predictable rates. When these proteins persist long enough, the plant interprets this as a seasonal signal. Only then does the internal conversation shift from survival to reproduction. This means a flower is not responding to spring. It is responding to a pattern of nights. Temperature also leaves traces. Cold exposure can silence genetic suppressors that otherwise prevent flowering. In certain species, without a prolonged cold period, flowering never occurs at all. The plant does not fail. It waits indefinitely. This requirement is so strict that even artificial warmth can delay flowering for years. From the outside, this looks like patience. Internally, it is regulation. When a bud finally forms, it is already late in the process. The basic architecture has been decided. The number of petals, their orientation, the placement of reproductive organs, all of this is fixed early. What follows is refinement, not invention. Buds are often mistaken for inactive forms. In reality, they are sites of intense cellular negotiation. Hormones move in gradients, not bursts. A slight imbalance can alter shape, color distribution, or timing. These changes are not corrected later. A flower accepts its final form before it opens. Opening itself is not a simple action. It requires pressure. Water pressure inside plant cells increases until structural limits are reached. Petals unfold not because they are pulled outward, but because they expand from within. This expansion is controlled. Too fast, and tissue tears. Too slow, and pollination windows are missed. Some flowers open only once. Others open and close repeatedly, responding to daily cycles. These movements are not driven by muscles, but by differential cell expansion. Cells on one side of a petal take in water faster than those on the opposite side. The flower bends, rotates, or closes accordingly. When the pressure equalizes, the movement stops. This means flowers are never truly still. They are constantly adjusting internally, even when motion is imperceptible. Presence, in this context, is not visual, it is temporal. Certain flowers are present only at night. The night-blooming cereus, for example, opens after sunset and collapses before morning. Missing this window means missing the entire event. The flower does not extend its availability. It does not compensate. It simply completes its cycle and disappears. This brevity is not a weakness. It is a filter. By limiting access, the flower ensures interaction only with specific pollinators. Moths with long proboscises, bats with spatial memory, insects that navigate by scent rather than sight. The flower is not hidden. It is selective. Scent plays a central role here. Unlike color, scent does not require light. It travels through air, around obstacles, and persists after the flower itself has closed. Some flowers release scent hours before opening, effectively announcing future availability. Pollinators arrive early, hover, and wait. Other flowers do the opposite. They remain chemically silent until physical contact occurs. Touch triggers the release of volatile compounds, creating a localized scent burst. This reduces waste and increases efficiency. The flower communicates only when it matters. Presence, then, is conditional. Color is often assumed to be the flower's primary signal, but many flowers reflect wavelengths humans cannot see. Ultraviolet patterns form visual maps for insects, guiding them toward reproductive structures. To a human observer, the petal looks uniform. To a pollinator, it contains contrast, direction, and depth. These ultraviolet patterns are temporary. After pollination, may fade. The flower effectively updates its status, signaling that it no longer needs attention. This reduces unnecessary visits and conserves energy across the ecosystem. Some flowers change color entirely after pollination. White petals may turn pink, yellow may deepen into red. These shifts are not gradual aesthetic transitions. They are chemical responses tied directly to reproductive success. A successful flower withdraws. Not all flowers reward visitors. Some deceive them. Certain orchids mimic the appearance or scent of other flowers that do offer nectar. Pollinators approach, expecting a reward that never arrives. The flower gains contact without payment. In more extreme cases, flowers mimic insects themselves. Shape, texture, even reflective qualities align closely enough to trigger mating behavior in pollinators. These interactions are rare, highly specific, and often effective only once per pollinator. Learning quickly erodes the illusion. This strategy depends on scarcity. Large flowers often draw attention, but they also require structural reinforcement. Supporting wide petals demands thicker stems and stronger vascular systems. Smaller flowers avoid this cost by producing many blooms instead of investing in size. Neither strategy is superior. Each reflects a different solution to the same problem: being noticed without being depleted. Flower placement on a plant is also deliberate. Leaves and flowers compete for light. To minimize conflict, many plants arrange flowers in spirals or staggered layers. These patterns are not aesthetic accidents. They optimize exposure and reduce self-shading. Mathematical relationships often emerge here. Certain angular separations allow maximal spacing. These arrangements appear repeatedly across species, suggesting that efficient solutions are reused rather than reinvented. Flowers are shaped by function as much as by form. What appears as symmetry often hides subtle irregularities that guide pollinators more effectively than perfection ever could. Some flowers allow only a single approach angle, controlling entry and exit with precision, while their pigments and shapes create small pockets of warmth. Inside these structures, temperatures can rise above the surrounding air, turning the flower into a temporary refuge where insects linger longer, increasing the chances of successful transfer. Flowers also carry memory, though not in any conscious sense. Stress experienced by the plant drought, damage, scarcity can quietly reshape future flowering behavior through chemical markers that alter gene expression. These internal records persist, influencing timing, structure, and responsiveness. Some flowers even react to vibration and touch, releasing pollen only when specific frequencies or repeated contact occur, responding not to noise, but to meaningful presence. Not every flower reaches visibility. Some buds are absorbed back into the plant when resources are scarce. Others complete reproduction without ever opening, pollinating themselves in silence. Across landscapes, flowering rarely aligns by chance. Timing shifts subtly from year to year, balancing competition and connection. By the time we notice a flower, its most important decisions have already passed. What we see is not the process itself, but its quiet remainder evidence of a system that has been active long before it appeared. A flower does not need attention to function. In many cases, attention is irrelevant. Some flowers operate almost entirely below the threshold of human notice. Their colors are muted, their size unremarkable, their lifespan short. Yet their internal activity during that brief window is dense with chemical exchange, timing decisions, and environmental reading. What appears insignificant often carries a disproportionate biological weight. Presence, for these flowers, is not visual. It is situational. Certain species flower only under very specific conditions. After rainfall that follows a prolonged dry period, or during narrow temperature ranges that may occur only a few days each year. If those conditions do not appear, flowering does not happen at all. The plant survives, but the event is postponed, sometimes indefinitely. This means absence is not failure, it is restraint. Some flowers remain closed even when fully developed. Their structures are complete, their reproductive organs mature, yet they wait. This waiting is not passive. Internal chemical clocks continue to run, measuring humidity, light quality, and atmospheric pressure. Opening at the wrong moment can mean wasting an entire reproductive cycle. Other flowers open briefly and repeatedly, testing conditions before committing. These partial openings allow scent release without full exposure. If no response follows, the flower closes again, conserving resources. Only when interaction is detected does it fully open. Flowers also experience crowding. In dense environments, visual signals lose effectiveness. Too many colors overlap, too many scents compete. In response, some flowers reduce reliance on attraction and increase reliance on proximity. They bloom closer to the ground, nearer to known movement paths of insects or animals, accepting fewer but more predictable interactions. In these cases, being present means being placed correctly, not being noticed widely. Some flowers communicate through timing rather than signal. They open when competitors are closed. This temporal separation reduces interference and increases clarity. The landscape may look unchanged, but the rhythm beneath it has shifted. This strategy is especially common in environments where pollinators are limited. Rather than competing, flowers take turns. Presence can also be chemical persistence. Certain flowers deposit compounds on the bodies of pollinators that influence future behavior. These compounds may alter how long an insect stays in an area, how it navigates, or which flowers it approaches next. The flower itself may already be gone, but its influence remains. Other flowers leave traces in soil. After flowering, chemical residues affect microbial activity around the roots. This alters nutrient availability and influences future growth, not only of the same plant, but of neighboring ones. Flowers are not isolated events. They are nodes in longer processes. Some flowers respond to being ignored. If repeated opening cycles fail to attract interaction, internal priorities shift. Energy is withdrawn earlier. Petals become thinner. Lifespan shortens. The plant reallocates effort elsewhere. Presence, in this case, is abandoned. Conversely, successful interaction can extend presence. Flowers that receive frequent visits may delay closure, maintaining accessibility longer than usual. This flexibility is limited, but real. The flower adjusts its duration based on feedback. Feedback does not require consciousness. It requires sensitivity. Flowers are sensitive to pressure changes caused by landing insects. They are sensitive to microdamage. They are sensitive to shifts in light angle that indicate time of day or seasonal progression. These inputs accumulate and influence behavior. Some flowers subtly adjust their orientation after initial contact, guiding future visitors more efficiently without drawing attention to the movement itself. Others actively limit interaction, using texture, chemistry, or form to discourage organisms that offer no reproductive value. For certain species, the flower is only a temporary structure, beginning to dissolve even before its role is complete. while its effects continue through seeds, soil chemistry, and ecological timing. A flower does not need to last long to matter. It only needs to open at the right moment. Flowers are often described as delicate because we encounter only their outermost layer. What remains unseen is the network of decisions that shape every curve, opening, and limit before a bloom ever appears. A flower does not grow freely into space. It negotiates with resistance at every stage. Gravity, internal pressure, tissue tension, and resource flow all impose boundaries that cannot be ignored. The visible form is not an expression of freedom, but the outcome of constraint. From the earliest stages of development, a flower is divided into zones that are allowed to grow and zones that must remain controlled. These zones are established through chemical gradients that move slowly across developing tissue. Where growth-promoting signals dominate, expansion occurs. Where inhibitory signals accumulate, growth slows or stops entirely. The edges of petals, the depth of folds, and the final silhouette of the flower emerge precisely where these opposing forces meet. This is why flowers rarely display perfect symmetry. Slight asymmetries are not flaws, but solutions. A perfectly even structure often distributes force poorly, while minor irregularities absorb stress and guide movement more effectively. In many species, these asymmetries also improve pollination efficiency by subtly positioning visitors where contact matters most. What appears imperfect to the human eye is frequently optimal for the flower's purpose. Petal thickness is another carefully managed variable. In many flowers, the base of the petal is reinforced while the outer edges remain thin and flexible. This design allows the flower to maintain overall shape while permitting gentle motion in response to air currents. These movements are not decorative. They influence how scent disperses and how insects perceive stability when landing. A surface that yields slightly underweight is often preferred to one that feels rigid and unresponsive. Some flowers go further, deliberately engineering weak points into their structure. These areas tear easily under stress, preventing damage from spreading inward. Instead of resisting force, the flower sheds it. In harsh environments, this sacrificial design allows the reproductive core to survive while peripheral tissue is lost. Other species adopt the opposite strategy, reinforcing petals uniformly so that damage is less likely but more costly when it occurs. Neither approach is universal. Each reflects a different balance between exposure and endurance. Access control is one of the most underestimated aspects of floral structure. Many flowers appear open at a glance, but restrict movement through subtle narrowing, internal ridges, or directional barriers. Tubular flowers guide visitors along specific paths, ensuring contact with reproductive structures while limiting unnecessary movement. Downward-facing blooms exploit gravity, favoring insects capable of hovering or clinging while discouraging others. Dense internal hairs slow entry and exit, increasing the time a pollinator remains inside. In flowers such as digitalis, internal markings and structural narrowing work together to guide behavior without force. The flower does not trap, it channels. Visitors move where the structure allows them to move, often without awareness that alternatives have been removed. The efficiency of this design becomes apparent only when examined closely, as the flower appears welcoming while remaining highly selective. Other flowers reject selectivity entirely and instead rely on abundance. Composite flowers like daisies expose dozens or hundreds of tiny reproductive units simultaneously. Each unit operates independently, accepting a higher rate of individual failure in exchange for overall success. This strategy reduces reliance on precision and compensates through numbers. The visible flower is not a single structure, but a coordinated field of smaller ones. Within these blooms, placement still matters. Even in apparent openness, reproductive organs are positioned with care. Heights, angles, and spacing influence where pollen is deposited and collected. These parameters are fixed early in development and rarely adjusted later. Once a flower commits to a structural plan, it carries that plan through to completion. Structural planning also governs how flowers respond to environmental stress. Wind applies repeated force that can weaken unsupported tissue. In response, some flowers thicken internal supports mid-development, reinforcing stems and petal bases. Others shorten their flowering period, completing reproduction quickly before damage accumulates. These responses are not reactions to single events, but adjustments shaped by long-term exposure patterns. Rain presents a different challenge. Water adds weight, dilutes scent, and interferes with pollen transfer. Some flowers repel water through microscopic surface structures that cause droplets to bead and roll off immediately. Others allow petals to fold inward during rainfall, shielding reproductive tissues until conditions improve. These movements occur slowly and smoothly, often unnoticed unless observed continuously. Color distribution follows similar principles of efficiency. Pigments concentrate where visibility yields the greatest return. In many species, petal bases are darker than edges, creating contrast that draws attention inward. Dark pigments also absorb heat, subtly warming reproductive tissues in cool conditions and improving pollen viability. Color, in this context, is both signal and thermal tool. In tulips, darker basal regions guide pollinators toward the center, while lighter outer petals reduce pigment cost without sacrificing visibility. This gradient is not decorative. It is economical. Other flowers exploit translucency rather than pigment density. Thin petals allow light to pass through, illuminating internal structures from behind. This backlighting increases visibility without additional energy investment. Structural decisions also determine which buds survive. Many plants produce more buds than they can support. As development progresses, internal competition for resources intensifies. Buds that lag in growth receive fewer nutrients and are eventually dismantled. Their components are reabsorbed and redistributed to remaining structures. This quiet optimization leaves no visible trace of loss. Some flowers incorporate redundancy within a single bloom. Multiple anthers or stigmas function independently, ensuring that partial damage does not end reproduction. This design is common in environments where contact is unpredictable or damage frequent. Other flowers rely on singular precision, investing heavily in protection and timing because only one opportunity exists. Protection itself takes unexpected forms. In Passiflora, complex filament structures interfere with unwanted visitors while guiding desired ones. These filaments are flexible, absorbing impact and reducing breakage, while also creating visual complexity that discourages non-specialists. Certain orchids employ hinged mechanisms that move only under sustained pressure, preventing accidental activation by wind or rain. All of this structural intelligence emerges without awareness. It is the result of physical constraints interacting with biological rules. Flowers do not plan, but they are shaped by what cannot be violated. Gravity must be respected. Pressure must be balanced. Energy must be conserved. Surrounding architecture further influences development. Leaves, stems, and neighboring plants affect how a flower can present itself. Rather than overriding these influences, flowers adapt. A tilted stem leads to asymmetrical growth. Shaded conditions alter pigment distribution. Two flowers of the same species, growing meters apart, may arrive at noticeably different solutions. Timing locks these solutions in place. Structures that form early constrain what can develop later. Late-forming tissues adapt to existing conditions rather than reshaping them. This sequencing explains why some features appear rigid while others remain flexible until the end. The ending of a flower follows a clear internal order. Petals are usually the first structures to lose support as nutrients are gradually withdrawn, while pigments fade before the physical form fully collapses. Scent production stops earlier than visual signaling, ensuring that energy is spent only as long as the flower remains functionally useful. This sequence is not decay alone, but an efficient shutdown that preserves purpose until the final moment. Even after flowering, form continues to shape outcomes. Dried stems, seed heads, and altered leaf positions influence airflow, light, and animal movement, while changes below ground affect soil structure and microbial life. What we perceive as elegance is often the result of limitation rather than freedom. Growth ends where resistance increases, movement pauses where stability would fail, and form settles into the most efficient compromise. This quiet architecture does not seek attention. It simply completes its role and prepares the conditions for what comes next. Flowers are constrained not only by what they are built from, but by how quickly they must decide. Structural choices are often locked in long before a bloom becomes visible, because waiting too long introduces instability. Once internal pressure reaches a certain threshold, tissue expansion becomes difficult to redirect. This is why many flowers commit early to forms that may not be ideal but are reliable. In biological systems, reliability often outweighs optimization. This early commitment explains why flowers sometimes appear inefficient. A petal may block airflow, or a structure may seem awkwardly placed. Yet these apparent inefficiencies often reflect compromises made under uncertainty. Conditions at the moment of development, temperature fluctuations, uneven light, limited nutrients force the flower to settle for forms that can survive variability rather than excel under perfect circumstances. The internal architecture of a flower determines how it absorbs stress and distributes damage. Pressure, wind, repeated contact, and internal tension do not affect all tissues equally. Instead, strain is often redirected toward regions that can be lost without ending the flower's function. Reproductive structures remain protected for as long as possible, even as outer areas begin to weaken. Some flowers go a step further by embedding predictable points of failure into their form. These areas are intentionally less reinforced, allowing damage to occur in controlled ways under extreme conditions. Rather than resisting stress indefinitely, the flower decides where it will break. A bloom may appear torn or incomplete, yet still remain capable of fulfilling its purpose. Timing plays a decisive role in this balance between strength and flexibility. Certain tissues remain soft during early development, allowing expansion and positioning, then harden only after the flower has fully opened. If rigidity arrived too early, growth would be restricted. If too late, protection would be ineffective. Reinforcement is triggered precisely when flexibility is no longer required. A flower's form is also shaped by its surroundings. In dense vegetation, competition for space alters growth patterns. Stems elongate, blooms tilt, and structures compress to fit within narrow gaps. These changes are not temporary adjustments, but permanent features that define the flower's final shape. In open environments, the opposite tendencies appear. Without physical obstruction, flowers often spread wider, rely less on vertical support, and prioritize horizontal visibility. The same species can develop strikingly different forms based solely on crowding, without any genetic difference between individuals. Orientation adds another layer of adaptability. Some flowers track light during development, not to gather energy, but to position themselves on likely paths of pollinator movement. This tracking may stop once flowering begins, fixing orientation in place. Other species continue slow adjustments, responding to seasonal shifts or changes in surrounding plants. This responsiveness is carefully limited. Excessive movement introduces mechanical fatigue and increases the risk of failure. Flowers therefore balance sensitivity with durability, settling into positions that require minimal correction over time. As conditions stabilize, reliability becomes more valuable than precision. Internal structure is also shaped by the size and behavior of visitors. Flowers that attract large pollinators reinforce stems and internal scaffolding to support additional weight and movement. Those visited by smaller insects remain lightly built, conserving energy where heavy support is unnecessary. Structural investment follows expected demand. Not all architectural features reflect current conditions. Some flowers retain structures shaped by pollinators that are now rare or absent. These features persist because altering them would require developmental changes that are too risky or costly. In this way, flowers carry a structural memory of past environments. Ultimately, floral form emerges from continuous negotiation. Each curve balances strength and flexibility. Each opening weighs access against protection, and each collapse follows an ordered withdrawal of resources. Flowers do not pursue perfection. They settle for what is sufficient. And once this structural work is complete, attention shifts away from form toward timing, where the next layer of quiet complexity begins. Flowers do not experience time the way animals do, yet they are among the most precise timekeepers in the living world. A flower cannot move toward opportunity or retreat from danger, so timing becomes its primary form of control. Opening too early wastes energy. Opening too late risks missing everything. Between these extremes lies a narrow window where reproduction is possible, and flowers have evolved remarkable ways to locate that window without error. Time, for a flower, is not measured in seconds or hours, but in accumulated conditions. Light is counted not by brightness, but by darkness. Temperature is not sensed as warmth alone, but as duration and consistency. A brief cold means nothing. Sustained cold changes everything. Flowers respond not to moments, but to patterns. One of the most important measurements flowers make is the length of uninterrupted night. Specialized proteins degrade slowly in darkness and reset in light. When darkness lasts long enough for these proteins to persist, the plant interprets this as a seasonal signal. In this way, a flower can distinguish spring from late winter, even if temperatures are similar. The calendar is chemical. This mechanism allows flowers to ignore short-term anomalies. A warm day in winter does not trigger blooming. A cold night in summer does not cancel it. Flowers wait for repetition, not exception. Their sense of time is conservative by design. Some flowers require not just long nights, but a history of cold before they will respond at all. This requirement, known as vernalization, prevents premature flowering in unpredictable climates. Without prolonged exposure to cold, certain flowers remain locked in a vegetative state indefinitely. The plant survives, but the flower refuses to appear. This refusal is not a failure. It is protection. Other flowers do the opposite. They bloom only after stress. Drought, fire, or extreme temperature shifts can trigger flowering in species adapted to unstable environments. In these cases, flowering becomes an emergency response, a way to reproduce before conditions deteriorate further. Timing here is not about abundance, but about urgency. Daily timing is just as precise. Many flowers open and close according to circadian rhythms, internal cycles aligned with the rotation of the earth. These rhythms persist even in constant light or darkness, proving that flowers do not merely react to external cues. They carry time within them. This internal clock controls more than opening and closing. It governs scent release, nectar production, and pollen readiness. A flower may be physically open, but chemically inactive, waiting for the correct hour. To a human observer, the flower appears available. To its intended visitor, it is not yet ready. Night-blooming flowers reveal how specialized this timing can be. Some species open only after sunset and collapse before dawn. Their entire reproductive window exists in darkness. These flowers often invest heavily in scent, releasing complex aromatic compounds that travel farther in cool, still night air. Visual signals become secondary or disappear entirely. In contrast, Many daytime flowers suppress scent production at night to conserve energy. Even if the flower remains open, its signals fade when pollinators are inactive. This selective silence reflects an understanding of time that is both economical and precise. Some flowers open gradually over hours, others rapidly within minutes. Speed itself is a timing strategy. Rapid opening reduces exposure to unfavorable conditions, while slow opening allows adjustment if circumstances change. Flowers capable of reopening after partial closure gain additional flexibility, testing the environment before committing fully. Commitment, once made, is costly. The lifespan of a flower is often shorter than we expect. What looks like days of beauty may represent only a few hours of reproductive readiness. Outside this window, the flower is either preparing or withdrawing. The visible bloom is not the active phase. It is the envelope around it. When pollination succeeds, a flower's relationship with time changes immediately. Internal signals begin shutting the bloom down. Petals lose firmness, scent production slows, and access narrows, sometimes within hours. An unpollinated flower behaves differently, extending its openness, adjusting nectar chemistry, or persisting longer in uncertainty. Time becomes flexible when success is unclear, and persistence turns into a calculated risk rather than a default state. At larger scales, flowers use timing as a way to organize entire landscapes. Some species synchronize flowering across populations, blooming all at once to overwhelm pollinators and favor cross-pollination, while others stagger their schedules to reduce competition and ensure steady access to limited visitors. Altitude, latitude, rainfall, humidity, and heat all act as clocks, shaping when flowers open, close, or delay action. In many environments, flowering aligns not with dates, but with ecological resets, such as seasonal rains or shifts in daily risk. Over longer periods, timing becomes memory. Stress experienced in one season can shift flowering schedules in the next through chemical markers that bias future decisions. Some flowers delay reproduction until internal reserves are sufficient, while others flower early and often, trading size for opportunity. Even within a single plant, timing varies between early and late blooms. Waiting, in this context, is not inactivity, but constant measurement, and precision often replaces duration. Flowers treat time as a resource to be spent carefully, shaping rhythms that ripple outward across seasons and ecosystems. Waiting for a flower is never empty time. Even when nothing appears to be happening, internal systems continue to measure, compare, and revise. Chemical pathways remain active, sampling light quality, temperature stability, moisture, and even subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure. A flower does not pause its clock when it waits. It refines it. Some flowers are capable of delaying action repeatedly without losing readiness. Buds may remain fully formed for extended periods, holding internal pressure just below the threshold required for opening. This state is metabolically expensive, but it allows rapid response when conditions finally align. The flower is not dormant. It is restrained. Other species cannot afford such restraint. Their timing decisions are irreversible. Once internal signals pass a certain point, flowering begins whether conditions remain favorable or not. These flowers accept higher risk in exchange for speed. In environments where opportunity is brief, hesitation can be more dangerous than error. Flowers also differentiate between kinds of waiting. There is waiting for light, waiting for warmth, and waiting for absence. Some flowers delay opening until competing species have closed, reducing signal noise. Others wait for windless conditions, allowing scent to linger rather than disperse. Still others wait for the absence of rain, recognizing that water can erase hours of chemical signaling in minutes. This selectivity reveals an important principle. Flowers do not wait for perfection. They wait for adequacy. Conditions do not need to be ideal. They need to be sufficient. This threshold varies widely across species and environments, producing a wide spectrum of timing strategies. Certain flowers open only at transitional moments, dawn and dusk, when multiple environmental variables shift at once. Light angle changes, temperature gradients reverse, humidity rises or falls. These moments are unstable, but rich in information. Flowers that exploit transitions are tuned not to states, but to change itself. In some desert species, flowering is triggered by the first significant rainfall after long drought. The timing is not tied to season, but to event. Rain resets the ecological clock, activating pollinators, softening soil, and altering air chemistry. The flower responds not to time elapsed, but to time transformed. Other flowers rely on cumulative thresholds. A single cold night does nothing, but weeks of cold silence inhibitory pathways. A brief dry spell is ignored, but prolonged scarcity triggers alternative schedules. Flowers do not count days. They integrate experience. This integration allows flowers to reject false signals. Sudden warmth in late winter does not override the memory of cold. Unexpected rain during an otherwise dry season does not always trigger flowering. By requiring consistency, flowers protect themselves from deception by the environment. Yet this conservatism has limits. In rapidly changing climates, reliable patterns dissolve. Flowers face mismatches between internal clocks and external reality. Some species respond by loosening thresholds, becoming more flexible. Others remain rigid and decline. Time, once an ally, becomes a source of risk. Daily rhythms also evolve under pressure. In some flowers, opening times shift gradually over generations to track pollinator behavior. If pollinators become active earlier or later in the day, flowers that adjust survive more often. These changes are subtle, often measured in minutes rather than hours, but their impact compounds. Within a single flower, timing is layered. Scent may peak before full opening, guiding pollinators in advance. Nectar production may lag behind opening, rewarding only persistent visitors. Pollen may mature after petals have already expanded. These offsets reduce waste and refine interaction. Some flowers intentionally separate male and female phases in time, a strategy known as dichogamy. By producing pollen before becoming receptive, or vice versa, they reduce self-pollination. Timing becomes a barrier, replacing physical separation. This temporal separation can be brief or extended. In some species, phases overlap slightly, allowing limited self-fertilization if external pollination fails. Others enforce strict separation, accepting lower immediate success for greater genetic diversity. Flowers also use time defensively. Certain species close during periods of peak herbivore activity, reopening only when risk subsides. Others shorten their flowering period in response to repeated damage, shifting resources inward rather than persisting in exposure. These adjustments do not require memory in the human sense, but they do require feedback. Damage alters internal hormone levels, which in turn shift timing decisions. The flower adapts not by learning, but by recalibrating thresholds. Seasonal timing leaves signatures and structure. Early season flowers are often larger and more resource-rich, benefiting from stored reserves. Late season flowers may be smaller, faster, and less durable, reflecting depleted internal stores. These differences are not incidental. They are timed expressions of availability. Even within a single plant, early flowers may receive preferential investment. Later blooms act as contingencies, opening only if conditions remain favorable. Time becomes a hierarchy. Some flowers widen their flowering window, opening intermittently over weeks or months to increase the chance of alignment, even if this weakens the strength of their signal. Others do the opposite, narrowing their timing to a precise moment and relying on accuracy rather than duration. These contrasting strategies exist side by side, because no single relationship with time works everywhere. What succeeds depends on conditions, history, and risk. Across entire landscapes, these timing choices shape ecosystems. Waves of flowering influence insects, which affect predators and seed dispersal, linking flowers to systems far beyond themselves. When these rhythms align, stability emerges. When they fall out of sync, effects cascade. Flowers do not predict the future, but adjust cautiously to what has been reliable in the past, treating time as an active force one to stretch, compress, or resist until the focus shifts from when they act to how the action is signaled. Flowers communicate constantly, yet almost never directly. They do not send signals outward with the intention of being understood. Instead, they shape environments so that certain responses become more likely than others. What we interpret as color, scent, or form is not expression, but calibration. The flower does not ask for attention. It structures perception. Color is often the most obvious signal, but it is rarely designed for human eyes. Many flowers operate in visual ranges that humans cannot perceive, particularly in ultraviolet wavelengths. To us, a petal may appear evenly colored. To an insect, it may contain sharp contrasts, directional patterns, and dark centers that guide movement with precision. These patterns do not decorate the flower, they instruct. Ultraviolet markings often fade quickly after pollination. This change is not aesthetic aging, but informational updating. A flower that has already been visited reduces further attention, conserving energy and redirecting pollinators elsewhere. In this way, flowers collectively manage traffic, preventing waste across the system. Color can also mislead. Some flowers advertise rewards they do not provide, mimicking the appearance of nectar-rich species without producing any themselves. This deception works best when the mimics are rare. Once pollinators learn the difference, the illusion fails. These flowers rely not on persuasion, but on surprise. In other cases, color is used to repel rather than attract. Certain flowers shift hue after pollination, becoming less visible or less appealing. The message is simple: interaction is no longer needed. This change can occur within hours, driven by rapid chemical transformations. Scent operates on a different logic. Unlike color, it does not require line of sight. It moves around obstacles, persists after the flower closes, and spreads unevenly depending on temperature and air movement. Flowers exploit this by releasing scent in pulses rather than continuously. A steady scent wastes energy. A timed release creates anticipation. Many flowers begin emitting scent before they open. This early signal acts as an invitation without access, drawing pollinators to the location in advance. When the flower finally opens, visitors are already nearby. Others delay scent release until physical contact occurs, conserving resources and ensuring that scent is produced only when interaction is possible. Scent composition is rarely simple. A single flower may produce dozens of volatile compounds, each evaporating at different rates. This creates layers of information that unfold over time. Initial compounds attract attention from a distance. Later compounds guide close-range behavior. The flower does not speak once. It speaks in stages. Some flowers produce scents that humans describe as unpleasant. The smell of decay, fermentation, or rot is not a mistake. These odors attract specific insects adapted to those environments. What repels one species draws another. Flowers do not optimize for comfort. They optimize for fit. Form reinforces these signals. The shape of a flower influences how scent accumulates and disperses. Deep or enclosed forms trap scent, creating concentrated pockets that guide visitors inward. Open forms allow scent to disperse quickly, signaling availability across a wider area. Surface texture adds another layer. Smooth petals reflect light and shed water, while textured surfaces absorb light and hold scent. Microscopic structures on petals can influence how insects grip, land, and move. These textures are not visible at a glance, yet they shape interaction at every step. Some flowers exploit contrast between visual and tactile cues. A petal may look soft but feel rigid, or appear stable but flex under weight. These mismatches test visitors. Only those capable of adapting complete the interaction. Flowers also communicate through absence. The lack of scent at certain times of day is as informative as its presence. Many flowers suppress signaling when pollinators are inactive, conserving energy. Silence here is not inactivity but discrimination. Timing modifies every signal. Color may intensify at specific hours. Scent may peak briefly, then vanish. Nectar production may lag behind opening, rewarding only those that persist. These offsets reduce exploitation by opportunistic visitors and favor repeat interactions. Some flowers separate signals spatially. Visual cues draw attention to one area, while rewards are located elsewhere. This forces movement, increasing contact with reproductive structures. The flower does not direct with arrows. It shapes probability. Deception appears again in mimicry. Certain flowers imitate the appearance or scent of insects rather than other flowers. Pollinators respond instinctively, attempting mating behavior that results in pollen transfer. These interactions are highly specific and often effective only once per individual. The flower depends on novelty. Other flowers avoid deception entirely, instead relying on reliability. They offer consistent rewards and stable signals, encouraging habitual visitation. These flowers build relationships over time rather than exploiting surprise. Environmental context alters signal effectiveness. In bright environments, color dominates. In shaded or nocturnal settings, scent takes precedence. Flowers adjust signal investment accordingly. A night-blooming flower may appear plain by day, but become chemically vivid after sunset. Wind and humidity strongly shape how floral signals function. In still air, scent lingers and forms stable trails, while moving air breaks it into fragments that are harder to follow. Flowers growing in windy environments often compensate by relying more heavily on visual cues or by producing heavier scent compounds that drift less erratically. Moist air slows evaporation and allows signals to persist longer, whereas dry air shortens their lifespan, prompting flowers to adjust not what they release, but when they release it. Timing becomes a way to cooperate with the atmosphere rather than fight it. Many flowers combine multiple signals to stay effective as conditions change. Color attracts from afar, scent confirms closeness, and texture guides final contact. If one signal fails, another can still function. Other flowers specialize in a single dominant signal, gaining efficiency but losing flexibility. Communication also involves exclusion, as bitter chemicals, irritating surfaces, or misleading forms quietly deter visitors that offer no benefit. These signals are not intentional. They persist because they work, shaping movement and memory across landscapes and turning flowers into points of navigation rather than explicit messages. Not every floral signal is an invitation. Some are filters, others are tests, and a few are deliberate traps. Flowers communicate not only to attract, but to control the terms of interaction. In this sense, communication becomes negotiation rather than announcement. One of the most effective forms of negotiation is selective difficulty. Certain flowers are easy to find, but hard to use. Bright colors and strong scents draw attention, yet the physical structure demands precision. Access may require hovering rather than landing, strength rather than size, or persistence rather than speed. The flower does not reject visitors outright. It raises the cost of entry until only the intended ones remain. This strategy is common in environments crowded with opportunistic organisms. By increasing effort, flowers reduce theft. Nectar robbers, for example, may detect a signal but abandon the attempt when access proves inefficient. True pollinators, already adapted to the structure, proceed. Some flowers employ misleading clarity. Their signals appear straightforward, but the reward is displaced or delayed. Visual cues may point toward an area with no nectar, forcing visitors to explore further. This exploration increases contact with reproductive structures. Confusion, in moderation, becomes functional. Deception reaches its most extreme form in mimicry. Certain flowers imitate the scent, color, or form of other organisms rather than offering any reward. In some orchids, floral scent closely resembles insect pheromones. Pollinators respond instinctively, attempting mating behavior that results in pollen transfer. These interactions are highly specific and often effective only once per individual. Learning quickly ends the illusion. Because of this, deceptive flowers rely on rarity. If too many mimics appear, pollinators adapt. Success depends on imbalance, not persuasion. The flower does not convince. It exploits expectation. Other flowers avoid deception entirely and instead invest in reliability. Their signals change little across time and conditions. Rewards are consistent, access predictable. These flowers encourage habitual visitation, forming stable roots in pollinator behavior. Trust here becomes a resource. These two strategies, deception and reliability, coexist because environments are variable. Where pollinators are scarce or inexperienced, deception can thrive. Where communities are stable and learning is strong, reliability prevails. Flowers do not choose sides. They occupy niches shaped by context. Communication also includes deterrence. Many flowers produce signals meant to repel rather than attract. Bitter compounds discourage feeding without harming pollinators. Irritating textures slow movement or prevent settling. Visual complexity confuses organisms that rely on simple cues. These deterrents are often localized, affecting only certain parts of the flower while leaving others accessible. Importantly, deterrent signals are rarely obvious. They do not announce danger. They create discomfort, inefficiency, or confusion, just enough to alter behavior. The visitor leaves, often without understanding why. Some flowers manage conflict through temporal signaling. They are welcoming only during narrow windows, closing or withdrawing signals at other times. This reduces exposure to organisms that would cause harm without benefit. Timing, once again, becomes part of communication. Others change signals dynamically. After repeated damage or unproductive visits, internal chemistry shifts. Scent weakens, nectar composition changes, or structural stiffness increases. These adjustments do not target individuals, but they reshape interaction patterns over time. Flowers also communicate indirectly through their effects on the environment. Scent trails influence insect movement even after the flower closes. Visual landmarks persist after petals fall. Memory extends communication beyond presence. Indirect signaling shapes behavior on a larger scale. Pollinators learn routes, associate places with success or failure, and adjust future movement accordingly. Flowers stop being isolated points of attraction and instead become part of a wider navigational network, influencing movement even after direct interaction ends. Miscommunication is unavoidable. The same signal can attract one species while repelling another, and flowers do not attempt to resolve this conflict. They tolerate it. Success does not require universal understanding, only enough alignment with a limited set of effective responders. In some cases, misunderstanding becomes an advantage, as signals that confuse predators or herbivores, while remaining clear to pollinators, provide a form of protection. All communication is constrained by cost. Producing scent, pigment, or complex structures demands energy, forcing flowers to balance signal strength against duration. Strong signals attract attention quickly, but exhaust resources. while weaker ones persist longer at the risk of being overlooked. Each species settles into a compromise shaped by its environment and history. Over time, these compromises are filtered rather than designed. Environmental change alters which signals work, pollinator communities shift, and older signals may persist simply because changing them is too costly. Mismatches appear not as mistakes, but as delays. Signals that consistently fail fade away, while those that produce even partial alignment remain. Flowers do not speak in messages. They endure through fit, shaping relationships that continue even after signals fade and interaction gives way to trace. Flowers are often described as cooperative organisms, partners in mutual exchanges with insects and animals. This description is comforting, but incomplete. Cooperation exists, yet it is rarely equal, rarely stable, and often accidental. Flowers do not form alliances. They participate in encounters whose outcomes shift constantly depending on timing, behavior, and chance. At the most basic level, flowers depend on movement they cannot control. Pollen must travel, seeds must disperse, and neither task can be completed alone. This dependence forces flowers into relationships, but dependence does not guarantee fairness. Many interactions benefit one side disproportionately, and flowers tolerate imbalance as long as the outcome remains viable. Consider flowers pollinated by bees. The relationship appears straightforward, nectar in exchange for transport. Yet even here, conflict is common. Some bees collect nectar without contacting reproductive structures, taking reward without providing service. Flowers respond by altering shape, tightening access, or reducing nectar availability. The interaction becomes a negotiation rather than a contract. Other flowers accept loss as part of strategy. In species like clover, producing abundant nectar ensures frequent visits, even if some are unproductive. The cost of waste is outweighed by the benefit of volume. Efficiency is sacrificed for probability. Not all pollinators are insects. Birds, bats, and even small mammals participate, often unintentionally. Flowers adapted to birds tend to be robust, tubular, and vividly colored, not because birds prefer beauty, but because their feeding mechanics demand durability. Nectar volume increases, scent decreases, and structural strength becomes essential. The flower adjusts to the visitor, not the other way around. Bat-pollinated flowers reveal another imbalance. These flowers often open at night, produce strong odors, and offer copious nectar. Bats consume large amounts, far more than insects would, and often damage floral tissue in the process. Yet the distance bats travel compensates for loss. A single visit can move pollen kilometers away. The flower accepts damage for reach. Some relationships are asymmetrical to the point of exploitation. Certain flowers rely on ants for protection rather than pollination. Ants deter herbivores, yet their presence can interfere with pollination by repelling other insects. Flowers balance this by secreting nectar in locations that attract ants away from reproductive structures. The relationship is managed, not resolved. In other cases, flowers are exploited without benefit. Nectar robbers pierce petals or stems to access nectar directly, bypassing intended routes. This behavior reduces resources without aiding reproduction. Flowers respond indirectly, thickening tissues, altering nectar chemistry, or shortening flowering duration. Rarely can they prevent exploitation entirely. Some flowers turn exploitation into advantage. In species where nectar robbing creates openings, these openings may later guide legitimate pollinators more efficiently. Damage becomes structural modification. The flower adapts to harm rather than resisting it. Wind represents a different kind of partner. It offers no feedback, no learning, no choice. Wind-pollinated flowers invest little in visual or chemical signals. Instead, they produce vast amounts of pollen and expose it openly. Loss is expected. Success depends on abundance and timing rather than interaction. These flowers sacrifice precision for scale. Their relationship with wind is entirely one-sided, yet effective. They do not negotiate. They release. Animals involved in seed dispersal create relationships that extend beyond flowering. Fruits develop where flowers once were, altering signals entirely. Bright colors, sweetness, and texture invite consumption. Seeds pass through digestive systems or attach to fur, traveling far from the parent plant. This phase introduces new imbalances. Animals benefit immediately. Plants benefit later, if at all. Some seeds are destroyed, others deposited in unsuitable locations. Flowers accept this uncertainty because distance increases genetic opportunity. Certain flowers anticipate specific dispersers. Large seeds paired with nutritious fruit attract large animals capable of transporting them. Small seeds rely on birds or wind. The original flower shape influences the future fruit, binding early structure to later relationships. Human involvement complicates these networks further. Humans select flowers for color, scent, or rarity, often disconnecting them from original ecological partners. Pollinators may be absent, yet flowers persist through cultivation. Relationships that once mattered become optional. In some cases, humans replace pollinators entirely. Manual pollination ensures reproduction where natural partners are gone. The flower survives, but the relationship collapses into dependency. Flowers that leave cultivation and return to wild systems often carry altered signals shaped by human preference, confusing local pollinators or attracting unintended ones. As they interact with insects, they also reshape ecosystems indirectly by drawing predators and shifting food webs, sometimes benefiting from reduced herbivore pressure without direct action. Timing strongly influences which relationships form. Early season flowers rely on generalist pollinators, while late bloomers depend on specialists, shaping their signals accordingly. In extreme environments, some flowers form fragile but efficient partnerships with a single pollinator, while others spread risk by engaging different visitors at different times or through self-pollination. Many relationships remain hidden. Underground fungal partnerships affect flowering strength and timing, while competition with other plants alters signals and schedules. Failure is common and expected, but persistence depends on enough success over time. Flowers do not aim for balance. They endure through uneven networks whose effects remain long after flowering ends. Relationships involving flowers are rarely permanent. Even long-standing partnerships can weaken, shift, or disappear entirely when conditions change. Flowers do not maintain relationships. They tolerate them for as long as they remain useful. When usefulness fades, interaction often collapses quietly rather than dramatically. One of the most common reasons for breakdown is mismatch in timing. A flower may open earlier than usual due to warmer seasons, while its primary pollinator emerges later, still responding to older cues. The flower waits, signals, and eventually withdraws without interaction. Nothing visibly fails, yet the relationship produces no outcome. Repeated mismatches like this erode once reliable partnerships. Some flowers respond to this erosion by broadening their interaction range. They relax structural constraints, increase accessibility, or adjust signal intensity to attract alternative visitors. These changes are rarely precise. New partners may be less efficient, more damaging, or inconsistent. The flower accepts lower quality interaction in exchange for continuity. Other flowers remain inflexible. Their structures and signals are too specialized to adapt quickly. When their partners disappear or shift behavior, reproduction declines sharply. These flowers often persist vegetatively for years, flowering repeatedly without success. The relationship does not end. It becomes empty. Breakdown can also occur through overuse. When a pollinator population grows too large, Flowers may experience excessive visitation. Nectar is depleted rapidly, structures are damaged, and reproductive organs suffer wear. What was once beneficial becomes destructive. Flowers respond by shortening flowering periods, reducing reward, or altering access, effectively pushing partners away. In some cases, flowers abandon external relationships altogether. Self-pollination becomes the primary strategy, not as preference, but as necessity. This shift reduces genetic diversity, but ensures survival. The flower chooses certainty over connection. Relationships can also dissolve spatially. Habitat fragmentation separates flowers from their partners, even when timing remains aligned. Distance replaces incompatibility. Signals travel, but responders cannot reach them. The flower continues to communicate into emptiness. Human alteration of landscapes accelerates this process. Roads, agriculture, and urban spaces interrupt movement routes. Pollinators that once moved freely are confined or eliminated. Flowers adapt slowly, often lagging behind environmental change. Relationships fracture not because of failure, but because space has been redefined. Some flowers exploit disruption. In disturbed environments, generalist species thrive. These flowers accept almost any visitor, reward minimally, and reproduce opportunistically. Their relationships are shallow but numerous. Stability is replaced by volume. Other species decline quietly. Their signals persist, but no longer align with local behavior. To observers, the flowers appear healthy, yet seed production drops year after year. The absence of outcome becomes the only sign of collapse. Relationships also break through competition. When new flowering species enter an environment, existing relationships are disrupted. Pollinators redistribute attention. Flowers intensify signals, shift timing, or reduce investment. Some survive this competition by retreating into narrower niches. Others are outcompeted entirely. In rare cases, new relationships emerge unexpectedly. A flower may attract a previously irrelevant species that becomes an effective partner. These shifts are often accidental, not adaptive in intent. Over time, however, they stabilize, reshaping the network. Breakdown is not always negative. The loss of one relationship can reduce dependency and open space for diversification. Flowers that survive disruption often do so by becoming less precise and more tolerant of variation. Yet tolerance has limits. Excessive generalism can increase damage, disease transmission, and inefficiency. Flowers balance openness against vulnerability, adjusting continually as relationships shift. Some flowers leave behind consequences, even when relationships fail. Pollinators that learn to avoid a flower after repeated unrewarding visits alter their roots permanently. These behavioral changes persist beyond the individual bloom, shaping future interactions for other species. In this way, a failed relationship still alters the system. Flowers do not experience regret or adaptation in the human sense. They persist through repetition. Successful interactions reinforce structures. Failed ones quietly disappear from future generations. Over long timescales, this filtering reshapes entire ecosystems. Species with brittle relationships vanish. Those with flexible or layered interactions remain. What appears stable is often only the temporary alignment of many fragile connections. Flowers are not passive participants in this process, but neither are they directors. They exist within networks they cannot see, responding only to immediate outcomes and inherited constraints. Relationships form, dissolve, and reform continuously. Each flower participates briefly and withdraws. What remains is not partnership, but effect. As these effects accumulate successful, broken, redirected, they begin to outlast the interactions that produce them. A single flowering season can alter movement patterns for years, as pollinators remember places of abundance or absence and adjust their routes accordingly. Seeds carried beyond their usual range settle in unfamiliar ground, sometimes failing, sometimes establishing quiet new presences that reshape future landscapes. Even failure leaves structure behind. Areas once rich in interaction become silent gaps that redirect attention elsewhere. Absence becomes active when flowers no longer appear where they once did, subtly reshaping movement, timing, and attention across the system. Insects pass through more quickly, predators shift routes, and learned expectations persist even after the bloom is gone. The flower vanishes as form, but its influence remains embedded in memory, soil, and behavior, carrying forward not as a signal, but as a quiet change in what becomes possible next. When a flower fades, it does not end. It changes direction. What we call wilting is often misunderstood as failure or decay, but biologically, it is a controlled withdrawal. The flower does not collapse all at once. It dismantles itself in stages, following priorities set long before it opened. Petals, which require constant energy to maintain color and structure, are the first to be abandoned. Their cells lose pressure, pigments break down, and flexibility disappears. This is not exhaustion. It is reallocation. Inside the flower, energy begins moving inward. Sugars, minerals, and water are pulled back through vascular channels and redirected toward developing seeds or storage tissues. What once supported display now supports continuation. The visible beauty fades precisely because it has finished its task. This withdrawal follows order. Nothing is random. Scent production usually stops before color disappears. Chemical signaling is expensive, and once attraction is no longer useful, it becomes wasteful. Visual signals linger slightly longer, not to attract new visitors, but because pigment breakdown is slower than chemical evaporation. Structural collapse comes last. The flower remains recognizable even after it is no longer active. In some species, this transition happens rapidly. A flower may appear vibrant in the morning and begin collapsing by evening. In others, withdrawal is gradual, stretched over days. Speed depends on strategy. Flowers that rely on narrow timing retreat quickly once success occurs. Those that tolerate uncertainty remain longer, hoping for alignment that never came. The moment of pollination often marks the turning point. Once fertilization begins, internal signals accelerate dismantling. Petals lose priority. Access narrows. The flower becomes inward focused. To an observer, this looks like aging. Internally, it is commitment. Yet even flowers that are never pollinated withdraw eventually. Persistence is not infinite. Energy spent waiting must be reclaimed. When thresholds are crossed, the flower closes its chapter regardless of outcome. This is not defeat, it is balance. After Solma, attention shifts fully to what remains behind. Seeds are not miniature versions of flowers. They are condensed futures. Each seed carries genetic information, stored energy, and instructions for survival, all wrapped in protective structures shaped by the flower that came before. The form of the seed reflects decisions made earlier, often invisibly. Some flowers produce many small seeds, accepting that most will fail. Others produce few, large seeds, investing heavily in each. These strategies are not opposites. They are responses to uncertainty. Where conditions are unpredictable, abundance increases chance. Where establishment is difficult, size and resilience matter more. The dandelion is often used as a symbol of simplicity, yet its strategy is subtle. Each seed is light, equipped with a parachute-like structure that responds to airflow rather than direction. The goal is not distance alone, but randomness. Most seeds land poorly. A few land perfectly. The flower does not aim. It releases. In contrast, poppies enclose their seeds in capsules with small openings near the top. When wind moves the stem, seeds spill out gradually, shaken free over time. This staggered release prevents all seeds from falling into the same conditions. Time becomes part of dispersal. Other flowers rely on animals to move their seeds. Fruits develop where flowers once were, changing color, texture, and chemistry entirely. Sweetness attracts consumption. Tough coatings protect seeds during digestion. The flower's influence extends into behaviors that may occur far from its original location. Some seeds are designed to wait. Lotus seeds, for example, can remain viable for decades, sometimes longer, sealed within hard protective coats. Germination does not follow immediately after dispersal. Time is deferred. The flower's future remains dormant, resisting decay until conditions align. In desert environments, annual flowers may not appear for years. Seeds remain buried, sensing moisture, temperature, and chemical cues from surrounding soil. A single rainfall after prolonged drought can trigger mass germination, brief flowering, and rapid disappearance. The flower exists only for a moment, but its waiting lasted far longer. These strategies reveal an important truth. The flower's timeline extends well beyond visibility. Even seeds that never germinate alter their surroundings. As they decompose, they contribute nutrients to the soil. They influence microbial activity. They change competition dynamics at small scales. Failure still produces effect. After seeds are released, physical traces remain. Dried stems, seed heads, and altered leaf positions persist, sometimes for months. These remnants influence airflow, light distribution, and animal movement. They create microhabitats, offering shelter or obstruction. In forest understories, the disappearance of flowers can change light conditions near the ground. Leaves may spread or retract differently after flowering, altering which species can grow nearby. The absence of a bloom reshapes the local environment as much as its presence once did. Memory also plays a role. Insects that visited flowers learn locations and timing. Even after blooms vanish, these learned routes persist for a time. Pollinators return to empty spaces, adjust behavior, and eventually abandon them. This lag reshapes movement patterns beyond the flower's lifespan. Predators respond to these shifts as well. Where insects gather, predators follow. When flowers disappear, these patterns dissolve. The flower, long gone, continues to influence the system through learned behavior. Humans participate in this memory too. Seasonal flowers mark time culturally. Their absence signals change. Even without biological interaction, expectation alters behavior: planting, harvesting, protecting. The flower's cycle becomes embedded in routine. One of the most overlooked aspects of this phase is irreversibility. The same flower will never open again. Even perennial plants produce flowers that are singular. Each bloom is unique in timing, structure, and outcome. Environmental conditions differ each time. The plant itself changes. There is no repetition, only resemblance. This non-repeatability gives weight to the flower's disappearance. What ends is not replaced. What follows is continuation, not restoration. Some plants show this clearly. After flowering, certain species die entirely, having invested everything into reproduction. Others survive altered. Resource allocation changes. Growth patterns shift. The plant carries the history of flowering forward. Over years, these histories accumulate. A perennial plant becomes a record of past successes and failures, visible in scars, branching patterns, and timing shifts. Flowers leave marks even on those that outlive them. Across landscapes, the combined effect of countless flowers ending reshapes ecosystems. Seed banks change. Species composition shifts. New relationships form where old ones ended. Absence becomes structure. What we perceive as quiet after flowering is often reorganization. Flowers do not mourn their ending. They are not designed to persist as form. They are designed to transform energy into future possibility. Once that transformation is complete, presence becomes unnecessary. In this way, the flower's final act is not disappearance, but delegation. Its influence passes to seeds, soil, memory, and movement. What remains is distributed. And as this distribution settles unevenly, unpredictably, it prepares the ground for cycles yet to come. This is not closure. It is transition. After the visible work of the flower is finished, what remains is not silence, but redistribution. Energy, information, and influence spread outward in forms that no longer resemble the bloom itself. This phase is quiet because nothing calls for attention, yet it is often the longest and most consequential part of the cycle. Seeds resting in soil are not inactive. Even while dormant, they interact with their surroundings. Moisture seeps in slowly, testing protective coats. Temperature fluctuations register as signals rather than threats. Chemical compounds released by nearby roots, fungi, and microbes provide context. A seed does not wait blindly. It waits conditionally. Many seeds are designed to resist germination, even when conditions appear favorable. This resistance prevents premature growth that would end in failure. Germination inhibitors break down gradually, requiring time as much as suitability. The future is delayed on purpose. In some species, light itself becomes the deciding factor. Seeds buried too deeply remain dormant until disturbance brings them closer to the surface. Fire, erosion, animal movement, or human activity can all trigger exposure. What appears as destruction becomes opportunity. The flower's future depends on interruption. This dependency on disturbance explains why some landscapes bloom only after disruption. Grasslands following fire, deserts after rain, forests after clearing, all reveal flowers whose absence was not failure, but restraint. The bloom arrives not because conditions are perfect, but because resistance has lifted. Not all futures emerge. Many seeds never germinate. Some are eaten, others decay. Yet even unrealized futures contribute. Decomposing seeds enrich soil. They alter microbial balance. They influence which organisms thrive nearby. Potential, even unrealized, reshapes context. As seeds disperse and settle, patterns form that no single flower intended. Clusters emerge. Gaps persist. Over time, these distributions affect competition, cooperation, and succession. The absence of flowers becomes as informative as their presence once was. Memory extends this influence further. Pollinators remember abundance and scarcity. Roots adjust. Preferences shift. Even after seasons pass, learned behavior lingers, shaping where attention returns and where it does not. The flower's effect survives without signal. Plants carry memory forward, not as recollection, but as bias. Stress, success, and timing leave chemical traces that influence future growth and flowering. A plant that endured harsh conditions may flower later, less often, or with reduced investment, while one that succeeded may commit resources more readily. This memory does not record events. It adjusts expectation, shaping probability without fixing outcome. What gives this phase its weight is irreversibility. The flower that existed cannot return. Even when the same plant blooms again, conditions have shifted, light angles change, pollinator populations fluctuate, internal reserves rise and fall. Each bloom is singular. Repetition exists only in resemblance, not in identity. This uniqueness applies equally to failure. A missed flowering window is not retried. The season moves on, and the system absorbs loss without pause. Flowers are not built for correction or regret. They proceed forward, carrying the consequences of what did or did not occur. As flowering ends, the landscape does not reset. Petals fall, stems break, scent disappears. But what follows is not emptiness. Soil chemistry shifts, movement patterns adjust, and light reaches different places. These changes are subtle, often unnoticed, yet they accumulate over time, layering one ending upon another to shape entire ecosystems. What appears as stillness is often deep reorganization. Growth redirects below the surface, relationships realign, and possibility redistributes. Flowers do not need to persist because their purpose is not duration. Once energy has been transformed into future chance, form becomes unnecessary. The calm that follows is not absence, but readiness. Without color or scent, attention drifts away, yet systems remain poised, thresholds set, and conditions quietly measured. Flowers do not conclude stories, they pass them on. And in that passing uneven, silent, and unseen, the world continues to recompose itself, one brief bloom at a time.